Hey guys, what's up? It's Mooninites here, bringing you a overview of the Mage Tower Challenge at the end of Legion. So I finally completed the Mage Tower across all 36 specs. This was something I didn't really anticipate doing, and as a result, you can probably see that I don't have footage of any of the Mage Tower challenges. I didn't anticipate making this video, and I definitely did not anticipate doing the challenge across all 36 specs. Originally, I was just going to do it across the specs I wanted the challenge appearance, but as I got closer, it kind of became more of something that I wanted to accomplish during my time in Legion. So I wanted to kind of give an overview of my thoughts of the Mage Tower, not necessarily a guide. If you're watching this video, there's probably not much time left on the Mage Tower, and there's also plenty of great guides on the internet that you can go find on either YouTube or written guides. So there really isn't a point for me to make a guide. So overall, I like the Mage Tower challenge quite a bit. Normally I don't like these types of challenges. Challenges that seem to have you play in a way that is sometimes counterintuitive, or sometimes forces you to play in a way that I think teaches bad habits. But the Mage Tower wasn't like that. In fact, I think it taught a lot of great skills for people to learn. And it forced people to play in a way that they had to use legendaries they otherwise wouldn't have used, or they had to use talents or spells they otherwise wouldn't have used. And I think that's really good. I think that's something that's really valuable, as long as it doesn't teach bad habits. Now, that doesn't mean everything about the Mage Tower was great. I certainly had a lot of problems with it. The main one, I think, is going to be the variance and difficulty. I think that's a big thing for everyone. Some legendaries did require, or some challenges did require legendaries, and I don't think that was particularly a great thing. But we'll get into that when we talk about each challenge and each spec. Overall, I thought all of the challenges were pretty good except for maybe one, and I'll talk about that. So the way I'm going to break this down is I'm not going to rate each spec. I really just don't think that's a great way to get an overview of the Mage Tower challenge. Besides, the gear I have, the classes I play, the legendaries I have access to, all that can change my perspective of a particular Mage Tower challenge that isn't necessarily accurate for everyone else. Now, to keep in mind, this is all my opinion. What you found hard, I might have found easy, and vice versa. But the way I'm going to break this down is I'm just going to talk about each challenge, rate them a little bit, what I liked and what I disliked. Alright, so the first challenge I'm going to be looking at is the End of the Risen Threat, which was the Healing Challenge. Now, the Healing Challenge gets a D from me overall. I just thought that the challenge was definitely way too long. Many of the stages felt pointless. It was stages 1, 5, and 6 that were only the hard stages. The other stages, I don't even know why they were in the encounter. The other thing I would probably note about this challenge is that it was significantly harder than a lot of the other challenges. And it was one of those things that it seemed like you could not outgear. In some cases, gear actually made it harder because you would heal yourself for way more than you wanted to with the Soul Flame debuff. The other thing I would note is that this challenge was like 20 minutes long, and every other challenge was maybe 5. It was definitely way too long. It seemed to me that this challenge was not play-tested alongside other challenges. And what I mean by that is they had one guy who probably did all the Mage Tower challenges for the healing, one guy who did all the, let's say, Agatha challenges, because this was a significantly different challenge than every other one, just in terms of length and also the fact that you had so much downtime. The other thing I had an issue with was the targeting in that 5th phase where you have to heal the ads that slowly walk in. It just seemed really buggy, or it was really frustrating for no reason. Something I think they should have probably fixed. Now, the easiest class for me for this challenge was the Restoration Druid. As you can see, I play my Druid. I am a Druid main. I don't normally play Restoration for my raid. And it's not something I would say I have a whole lot of experience on, but the fact that I had a whole lot of gear when doing the challenge and I had access to every Restoration legendary made it a lot easier. The hardest specs for me were the Holy Paladin and Resto Shaman. These are two specs I have very limited playtime on. The Holy Paladin I had a lot of throughput issues in that 5th phase. healing those ads that slowly walked in. I felt like the Holy Paladins didn't have a lot of great tools to deal with that. The Restoration Shaman, I had most of my issues in the first phase, dealing with the ads. It seems like they had really poor CC, while every other class had ways to deal with those ads, and instead they kind of relied on their healing cooldowns. So those are the two I probably spend the most time. I would say I probably had about 30 to 40 wipes on each of those specs, and I think I one-shot or two-shot the Restoration Challenge. Alright, the next challenge I'll be reviewing is the An Impossible Foe challenge, the Agatha challenge. This is what I did first on my Feral Druid. The grade I would give this is an A-. I thought the challenge was pretty awesome when it first came out. And obviously the one thing that makes this challenge kind of a joke is the Light Blood Potion. This was definitely just an oversight by Blizzard. I don't think that should necessarily entirely take away from the challenge, but it is something to consider because it makes it so easy. I liked the fact that this challenge was both an ad management fight and a DPS check. It had both of those things. The mechanics weren't bad either. I thought the mechanics were pretty good. It just felt like this fight really had a bit of everything, which is what you want to see in a challenge. You want to see players have to do a little bit of everything. The only thing I really didn't like is the Light Blood Potion. I'm sure it helped me complete this challenge across all the specs, except for Feral. But I just didn't like how it made it a complete joke compared to other challenges. The easiest spec I did this on was the Unholy Death Knight. Unholy Death Knight just has a lot of tools to do everything. And the hardest was probably the Feral Druid. I feel like that's a little unfair because I did the Feral Druid on the second pass of the Mage Tower, so I was like 901 item level. This was either right before Tomb of Sargeras came out or right after Tomb of Sargeras came out. I can't remember. So I obviously didn't have the gear or the artifact power levels, so it was really hard when it first came out on Feral. Besides Feral, I feel like that's a little unfair for me to rate Feral as the hardest. I would say probably Fury Warrior. I just don't play a Fury Warrior. I have no idea really how to play a Fury Warrior. I think more than anything, the Light Blood Potion and the fact that I outgeared it helped me complete it. Alright, so the next challenge we're going to be looking at is the High Lord's Return. This was the Tank Challenge. The Tank Challenge overall gets a B from me. I thought it was really good. I liked the fact that gear alone did not make the challenge super easy. It definitely helped, don't get me wrong. But you couldn't just outgear the fight, and I think that was a really good thing about the Tank Challenge. The one thing that a lot of people seem to complain about for the Tank Challenge was the fact that it was more of a DPS race and more than anything. I did not get that impression when I did the Tank Challenge. It seemed more like an ad management challenge, while or DPS was also important. But I did not get the impression that, it was only a DPS race. Granted, I did outgear the challenge on a lot of my classes, but overall I thought the mechanics were pretty solid. The one thing I did not like was that one class in particular, I thought the challenge was kind of a joke, and that was the Vengeance Demon Hunter. The Vengeance Demon Hunter just had way more tools to deal with this challenge than any other spec. So, obviously, the easiest challenge for me, or easiest spec, was the Vengeance Demon Hunter. The hardest was the Prot Paladin, and the Prot Paladin was probably the hardest class I did overall. The damage output seemed really low on Prot Paladin, and it seemed like I had to just kite ads over and over more than anything. I couldn't just burn them down. So the Prot Paladin probably took me about 50 tries. The Vengeance Demon Hunter I probably did on my second try. Alright, so the next challenge I'm going to be looking at is Fell Totem's Fall. So this is the Fell Totem DPS challenge. This grade, for me, is an F. This was, honestly, completely unacceptable in the difficulty level. It was far easier than anything else. I one-shot this challenge across every spec except for Destruction Warlock. The only reason I did not one-shot on Destruction Warlock is the first time I went in, I didn't actually know how to knock off the Fell-Hardened Scales off Jormug. So I went into the last phase with 80% damage reduction, and I voluntarily jumped off the edge. I just decided that I could do it, if I figured out how to knock off those scales. After I figured that out, it was a complete joke. There really just seemed like this was another instance of a Mage Tower challenge that did not necessarily get play tested alongside other challenges. More than anything, this challenge seemed kind of like what you would expect out of a really basic heroic dungeon boss. Nothing was particularly difficult. These are all very basic things you had to do, like DPS down this totem, DPS down ads that pop up, avoid lines on the ground. It was just, I mean, it was something that players are so used to by this point, and you really didn't have to go out of your way to even do the mechanics. The other thing about this was that even if you did fail a mechanic, it wasn't that punishing. The easiest spec for this, for me, was the Disc Priest. I don't think my health dropped below 90% on the Disc Priest. I don't even think there was a way for me to fail this challenge on my Disc Priest, or really any class. I'm not even going to get into a hardest spec because there was no spec that was difficult. Like I said, I one-shot this challenge on every spec except Destruction, and Destruction, I two-shot it. This was just way too easy. The next challenge I'm going to be looking at is the Closing the Eye, or the Xylem challenge. The grade I would give this is an A+. This was, to me, probably the best and most complete challenge. I like the fact that it had both mechanics and a DPS check. The other thing that I thought was really great about this challenge was the fact that every class had a little bit of something that made them feel good. There were certain things about being a survival hunter that made the challenge easier. There were certain things about being a sub-rogue that made the challenge easier. And I thought that really was great. It highlighted the strengths of each class, and it didn't necessarily do that in a way that was punishing for things that other classes had that you did not have. Every class felt unique in this fight. The one thing I would say is that there was only one class I really did not think fit the fight well, and that was the Sub-Rogue. The easiest class for me was the Survival Hunter. The hardest class for me was the Sub-Rogue. The Sub-Rogue I felt like, unlike the other specs, I had to use my DPS cooldowns on the Seeds in the last phase, the Corrupting Shadows phase. In other classes, I didn't feel like I had to burn as much. It felt like, the Havoc Demon Hunter, the Frost Death Knight, the Arms of Warrior, and the Survival Hunter all had ways to stop the ads from running in and nuke them down really fast. And the Sub-Rogue really did not have that. It didn't have a way to slow down the ads. If you wanted to nuke the ads, you had to burn cooldowns. So I didn't really particularly care for that aspect. I thought maybe this was just the wrong challenge for Sub-Rogue. But that's really the only spec I felt like this was the wrong challenge for. Alright, so we got two more. Next we'll look at the Thwarting the Twins challenge. And overall, I would give this challenge probably a B-. I didn't think this challenge was necessarily terrible, but it seemed like the only mechanic in this fight was running away, was kiting. And don't get me wrong, that's a very valuable skill to learn, but if you look at other challenges like God Queen's Fury or Closing the Eye, the Xylem challenge, there were a lot more mechanics in general for each for these challenges, and this one, it was basically like, how well can you run away? The other thing that I think really takes away from this challenge is the huge variance between specs, and this is based on gear and legendaries. Certain legendaries made this fight trivial. You look at the Affliction Warlock. I know a lot of people said the Affliction Warlock was one of the hardest specs they had done when it first came out, if they did not have the legendary ring Sacrolash, which, if you don't know what Sacrolash is, it's a 15% slow for targets afflicted by your corruption. Or if you didn't have the portal pants that make your portal, your demonic gateway instant. I happen to have both for Affliction, so it was a complete joke for me. But if you didn't have those, it was incredibly difficult. The other thing is some classes I found really easy. The easiest for me was the Marksman Hunter. The Frost Mage I found pretty easy as well. I know a lot of people said they struggled with the Frost Mage. I don't know how. The Frost Mage and the Survival Hunter, kiting is basically a non-issue. They also deal with the ads really well. I think they have a lot of burst with the hands. And to me, I found these classes so much better equipped to deal with this challenge than, let's say, the Affliction Warlock or the Shadow Priest. So, the hardest challenge for me on this or the hardest spec for me on this challenge was probably the Shadow Priest. The Shadow Priest overall, I just felt like didn't have any tools to deal with this challenge. They had very poor kiting ability. You had Psychic Scream or Mind Bomb if you took that. You didn't have a whole lot of burst for the hands. You didn't have a way to slow down really any of the ads or the boss. It just felt like the Shadow Priest, unlike any other spec, really had no way to deal with this challenge. So yeah, that was probably the hardest spec for me. Alright, so the final challenge we're going to look at is the God Queen's Fury. Now overall, I'd give this a B+. I thought it was a great challenge. It was one of my favorite challenges, but there were a few things that were obviously an issue with it. There was really no DPS check in this fight. I've heard of people doing this at like 880 item level or below, and just focusing on doing the mechanics perfectly. It was really just a mechanic check. Now, it is kind of a DPS race because there are so many mechanics that the longer you're in there, the more likely you are to fail. But overall, as long as you execute every mechanic, you really can't fail this challenge. I did like how there were different approaches in the way you could do this encounter. You could choose to DPS down Sigrun, or you could choose to DPS down the Runeseer or Jarl to make this fight easier. It seemed like as people got more gear, though, the best option for that was just nuking down Sigrun. But I did like how you could choose to approach it in a lot of different ways. The easiest challenges for this were Enhancement Shaman or Ret Paladin. Both these classes have really good cleave. They have decent mobility. Enhancement Shaman actually has pretty good mobility. And then, more importantly than anything, they have self-sustain. The hardest for me for this challenge was the Arcane Mage. Mana management is really obnoxious on this challenge. Couple that with the fact that the Arcane Mage is paper thin and has terrible defenses. And it felt like you could actually just die if you didn't actually execute the phase properly. And I'm not even talking about just failing mechanics. I'm talking about like just letting the boss hit you a little too much. So overall, that's how I would rate each challenge. I loved the Mage Tower challenge. I didn't anticipate doing all 36 specs, but I really had a great time. I'd give, I guess, a brief overview of the classes I thought were the hardest and the easiest for me. The hardest three were probably the Prot Paladin. I probably did 50 attempts on that, and the Restoration Shaman and Holy Paladin. Both of these probably took me about 30 to 40. I would guess closer to 40 challenges. The easiest three were probably all Fel Totem. The easiest for me was the Disc Priest, then probably followed by the Windwalker Monk, and then, you know, really pick any of the Fel Totem challenges. Yeah, it just wasn't that hard. I guess Marksman Hunter was up there as far as being really easy. So those are my thoughts on the Mage Tower challenge. Let me know what you think. I know some people probably found certain things easier than others, but those are just my thoughts.